Welcome to the King's Report, the 10th day of the fourth month and the 16th year of Changi. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king, Changi Kyungjimun. And for the past few Wednesdays, we've been studying uh, True Father's speech that he focused on quite heavily during the last months of his mission in his physical body. The title is the Cosmic Assembly for the Settlement of the True Parents of Heaven and Earth and Humankind, and for the proclamation of God's word by God's substantial self. And as I mentioned, this is the Korean version which Father gave to us uh, with a exact sort of replica, not necessarily copy, but a replica of his delivery copy. Is 73 pages long because it has such large font. Um, and I've been sharing the English translation that is on tparents.org, which is not bad. Um, I don't remember if I did this or not. Could have, maybe I don't know. Actually, I have no idea. So I don't know who did it, but and the speech also changed as Father went along. The copy on tparents.org is dated in 2012, whereas the Korean copy that I have is dated April of 2011. But I don't see any major differences between the two as I go through it. So I want to continue right now. We're on the page. So I'm going to go back just a little bit. So we're on page 39 of 73 as we start today. And here, we're going to start with this paragraph here. If you view the flow of history through the eyes that focus on God's providence, you can see that the changes of the times can be broadly classified into three stages. Now, Father lists two of those stages in this paragraph and the third one in the next one. And I was running out of time last time, so that's why I want to come back and do this a little more in detail. But Father, when he takes God's truth and communicates it to the world, he would often take existing words and give them new definitions, or even he would create new words. And this is an example of a place where he has created new words to express something. And so you can't look this up in a dictionary. It's not there. It's not there. So maybe in the future, someone could create a lexicon of fathers, of the new words that fathers has given. So in the Korean copy, I see that there are actually these are in quotation marks or single quotation marks, I think, indicating that it's kind of a word that you're not going to find in the dictionary. So the first of these three stages, Father says, is mul정 shide. Shide means era or age, and mul means thing, and chong means it can mean sentiment, heart, emotion, these kinds of things. So here, this translation has translated that as nature-centered era, and a time when instinctual feelings, materialisms, and closeness to animals and things of creation were prevalent. And this is a case where a translator has taken the liberty to try and explain what this term means, because he knows that the reader is not going to immediately understand. But in Korean, it's not necessary because Father's using Chinese characters, and Chinese characters in and of themselves have meaning, right? Uh, so you look at the Chinese characters and you can get some idea of what Father's trying to say. But these words here are not actually Father's words, it's kind of an explanation of Father's words. A time when instinctual feelings, materialism, Father does say here, 물본주의 쪽, but that's not, that's a different kind of materialism. He's not talking about the kind of materialism like, philosophical materialism, but he is emphasizing that when fallen human history first began, human beings fell to a level that is below God's creation. And uh, in Genesis chapter 3, we see that after the fall, God actually went and clothed Adam and Eve with animal furs. So human beings didn't know how to do that, and God had to do it for them somehow. So human beings gradually sort of learned how to live among and with and sort of within nature, and learned about fire, and learned about invented the wheel and all that kind of stuff. So human beings really fell into a state of complete ignorance. It was the um, uh, Archangel Lucifer's role to educate human beings, Adam and Eve, about how God had created the world and all the principles by which He created the world. But instead of doing that, the Archangel Lucifer decided to take dominion, or not decided, but effectively took dominion over Adam and Eve, or Adam and Eve allowed themselves to be dominated by Lucifer, let's say. I always want to avoid expressions that imply that Lucifer had a responsibility in this, but it was Adam and Eve who allowed themselves, failed to maintain faith in God's word and God's commandment, and therefore allowed themselves to be subjugated by Lucifer, and therefore missed the opportunity to be taught all these things by Lucifer. And so, for a long period of time, human beings were sort of very much a part of nature, right? More kind of just like another animal. Um, and it was only gradually that we learned how to, farm and instead of being hunter gatherers, began now to settle down in communities and a farm and start even to trade by creating more of something than we needed, and then trading that with something else that someone had produced. So it was a very gradual process that we came out of that. So that is and that is the era that Father is referring to here as the Muljong Shide, or the era of of the sentiment, emotion, shall we say, Chong of things, or I guess you could say material. But then we advanced. We advanced from that gradually. Next came the human-centered era, it says here. And then, so gradually, then we began to differentiate ourselves from nature as a whole. Originally, of course, human beings are differentiated quite clearly from nature. We have a portion of responsibility. The rest of nature, the rest of God's creation does not. And we have that portion of responsibility so that we can be qualified as to become God's sons and daughters, qualified to be the lords of creation, and to rule over be qualified to rule over creation. So gradually we started to accomplish that differentiation, sort of clawing our way towards the original ideal that God had for human beings. So gradually, things like human rights and respect for other human beings and human rights sort of grew up. In the original era, human beings were just like any other animal, like a mouse or a tiger or something like that. And especially if someone was of another tribe, then killing that a human being, killing human beings was not a big thing. But gradually, then we've started to rise above that into this era when we started thinking more about the value of human beings. So that would be the what is translated here as the human-centered era, or here in the Korean Injong Shide. Shide again means or age, and In means human, and Chong again emotion or sentiment, things like that. And Father here does give an explanation that when people's knowledge feelings, and emotions took precedence and dominated the world. And that actually is Father's, most of it, I think, is Father's explanation. 하늘의 공평한 감정을 앞세워. So the human centered when feelings and emotions took precedence, but also he says that ruling or governing the world with uh, heaven's heart of fairness, or emotions of fairness. Okay, and then he says that okay, but these two eras though are transitional. They're not the original ideal that God had in mind. They were courses of preparation necessary in order to enter the era. Okay, I'm losing my cursor here for some reason. In which people could rid themselves of their fallen nature, return to their original selves, and live as one united family where they attend God as their Father. So we are moving now in this era, in the era that we are living in, moving into a third era where human beings now have an opportunity to rid ourselves of the fallen nature. In other words, the nature that we inherited, our ancestors inherited from Lucifer in the fall. And of course, there are four kinds of fallen nature that we learn about in the divine principle. And you can refer back to the divine principle for that. But then return to our original selves, and live as one united family where they attend God as their Father. So we are not today as God created us. You know, people such as homosexuals may say, "Well, this is how God created me." Actually, no, it's not. None of us are today the way that God intended us to be. So you cannot use that excuse. We are all sinners. We are all uh, not the reflections of the original man or woman that God intended us to be. We are on our way towards that ideal, and uh, on our way we are committing all sorts of sin, and certainly homosexuality is one of those sins. That is part of the sinful nature that we are trying to rid ourselves of. So anyway, to live as one united family where we attend God as our Father. When that happens, we will enter a God-centered era. So this is the second one, and I remarked last time that Father actually does not say God-centered era. He says the instead of God, he says heaven. And this is the 천정 시대. 시대 again means era or age. 정 is emotion or sentiment, and 천 is heaven. And I suppose heaven means God, but if Father meant God, he would have said God, and he does not say God here for whatever reason. But anyway, I think it is perhaps better to stick as close as possible to the original. So, and then God, the final stage in which human beings who know and feel God's heart, okay, will follow the path of living for the sake of others. They will do this through establishing an absolute standard on the foundation of purifying themselves both inside and out through the holy blessing ceremony. This is the time of opening up the era of God's kingdom, a time in which we can return to the heart of the one true God. Please engrave this on your hearts. Uh, so the blessing ceremony gives us this opportunity then to take advantage of the blessing of this age or the merit of this age, that we are able to reach that original ideal that God has for us. And eventually everyone will, although it's going to take a lot more time for some people than for others. But within each of us is uh, an original mind, and this is an instinctive desire for the truth. And eventually, that instinctive desire for the truth will lead us into God's truth. And so, no matter how people may be living today, how evil people may be living today, at some point, if you stretch the timeline out far enough, then we are all going to be in God's kingdom. And of course, maybe not while we are in our physical bodies, right? It may take some time after we go into the spirit world, and a lot of time after we go into the spirit world to accomplish that. Okay? Once the actual era of Tonyuk begins, the spiritual and earthly worlds will be connected and brought into oneness, and all things will be governed under the union of the spiritual and physical worlds association. Okay, so now let's break this down a little bit. Um, the spiritual and earth worlds will be connected because the two worlds, the spirit world and the physical world, were divided as a result of the fall. The Lucifer dominated human beings, and in order to establish his position, he denied God, of course, and even in denying God, denied the whole spirit world, or at least kept human beings quite ignorant of it. And especially in the modern era, many people are not aware of the spirit world or believe it. There is nothing after death, that you die and that's it, and there's nothing. But of course, we know that God did not create us to be just a finite beings. He created us to exist for eternity because He created us for the purpose of being His absolute objects, object partners in love. And so we are not just created just for a temporary existence of, say, maybe 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years on Earth, but rather to exist eternally. And originally, of course, we were to actually not just exist, but live eternally, meaning that we are connected to the source of life, who is God. So this union of the spiritual and physical world's association is a something that Father sprung on us in this speech, which I think we still have not really figured out. Uh, and this is a literal translation of the Korean title that Father gives to this, what he calls an association. But is this an association in the normal sense? Are we going to file a 501c3 documents with it for this association, get a nonprofit status, and make a bank account? Well, I don't think so. I think this is an association, but it's a spiritual association that will come about at some point. And I think Father did not really explain too much about this association. Except for the person who's going to be in charge of it. And I don't know if that's in this version or not. I think it is. And we'll get to it. Okay. Which will be established on earth for the first time. And I'm sure God will lead us into this, uh, and we'll know it when we see it, I guess. Okay. Moreover, the province will be carried out according to heavenly law and the heavenly way. Elections conducted in a purely secular fashion will disappear from the face of the earth. All people will become one family through cross cultural marriage and the world peace marriage blessing. And we will enjoy tranquility and true happiness during the sacred reign of peace. Let me say it again, this day is drawing near. The Father is prophesying the end of elections, or at least he said, at least in a purely secular way. Um, and we'll see how that develops. This kind of thing will develop naturally as we go along. Father once said that somni is sulli. In other words, and somni is the word for providence, and sulli means something that occurs just sort of by natural flow. Just you go with the flow of the things. And God's providence just goes with the flow of it. And we see today that there is increasing uh, problems with election integrity, and of course, we are fighting against that and try to stop that. But I think the long term flow, though, is that people will try to find better ways to select leaders. And as Father has prophesied, that the elections conducted in a purely secular fashion will disappear. The and cross cultural marriage, well, in discussing the situation in the Middle East, I've talked about cross cultural marriage and saying that, the situation, for example, in Gaza, or the situation between sort of Iran and Israel is not going to have a solution, not going to be solved until you have intermarriage among those groups of people. That today uh, it would be very difficult for uh, Jews in Israel and someone an Arab in Gaza to Palestinian in Gaza to marry. There may be already be such couples, but I doubt that they will be living in either Gaza or in Israel. But they may be, I don't know. But it's really that kind of cross-cultural marriage that Father said is the ultimate and final solution to race relations in America, the relationship between Japan and Korea, and the relationship between um, fighting ethnic groups, ethnic groups fighting each other across the world. The world peace, marriage, blessing, and we will enjoy tranquility and true love and happiness. He says, and he says that this day is coming near. And as a part of preparing for that time, on February 18th, 2010, last year, so again, my copy, Korean copy is dated 2011, so that makes sense. I proclaim to all of heaven and earth the start of the new heavenly calendar. And this would be his birthday, I believe, in 2010. The Gregorian calendar and lunar calendar shall now stand in the position of Cain and Abel and serve the role of supporting the heavenly calendar by which we will record and indicate the progress of God's providence. So Father did not do away with the solar calendar. Um, and he does not say Gregorian calendar. He says the existing solar calendar and lunar calendar. And so, for example, what he means is that, for example, the heavenly calendar, like the Korean lunar calendar, is actually not a pure lunar calendar. It's a solar lunar calendar or lunar solar calendar. It's kind of a combination of the two. It's mainly lunar. But as I've mentioned before, there is a rule that causes the calendar to be adjusted every 3 years. For example, this year, the sixth month is going to be repeated, and I'll be explaining more about that when we get to the sixth month, I guess. But that happens because there's a rule that the winter solstice must always occur during the 11th month of the calendar. And the lunar calendar has 354 days, not 365. It has 354 days. And of course, the solar calendar has 365 plus every 4 years you tack on another day, except for when there's a double zero, in which case you don't, but roughly 365. So every year, the lunar calendar falls behind by 11 days. So 11 times 3 is 33. So roughly every 3 years, an extra month gets added to the lunar calendar. And this year is one of those years, and we're going to repeat the sixth month. It doesn't have a sort of another name or anything like that. It's not called the 13th month or anything. It's just we will repeat one of the months. And how you decide which month to repeat is also done according to a formula, which I haven't explained, but that's a little bit difficult to explain and let's explain briefly. But so the solar calendar, not necessarily the Gregorian calendar, because there are the Julian calendar is also a solar calendar, I think. So so it is the solar calendar is what Father's talking about here. So anyway, the solar and lunar calendars will be in the position of Cain and Abel, and they will be used to indicate the progress of God's providence. And that's what. So this is why today is the 10th day in the fourth month of the current heavenly calendar, and we are in the 16th year of Chang'e. And the 16th year because Father established the heavenly calendar in 2010, and this being 2010 was what, number zero? No, we never had a zero year. That was year one. And so this is the 16th year. You must now engrave True Parents' teachings onto your bones and practice them in your life. Yeah. Korean has a lot of very, very interesting expressions to explain or to express emotion. And engraving something on your bones is one of those that you'll often find in Korean. Don't actually, try to do that, but it would not be very healthy. Healthy, but it means that commit them to memory and be very familiar with them and don't forget them. Is what that means. And become one with God's teachings and practice them in your life. And remember, receiving according to the anatomy of the human body of the human being that we know from chapter 1 of the divine principle, we receive God's word and God's love through in our spirit mind, and the spirit mind and spirit body have given receive action, and then that transfers energy to the physical body, and then the physical body receives that, and then the physical mind or physical self, I'm sorry, physical mind and physical body then have given receive action in order to put that love and word from God into action through the physical body, and that is why we absolutely need to have a physical body in order to grow, because it's when we do that that energy is transferred back to the spirit self and acts as nutrients to the spirit self so that the spirit self can grow. So unless we put God's word into action, it does not lead to spiritual growth. Simply receiving God's word, receiving God's love is not enough. We have to put it into action for it to actually lead to spiritual growth and lead then towards the accomplishment of our portion of responsibility. And remember, our portion of responsibility is to grow our spirit self to the point where we are in God's direct dominion. Right? You must all get to. So, if you do not prepare now, we will surely be left behind. We should learn from the courage and the fortitude of the white-necked cranes that fly across the Himalayas, which are more than 7,000 meters high, in preparation for winter. And Father was very inspired by this scene of these birds flying high enough that they can fly over the Himalayan mountains on their migration path. And then here, the true parents have already prepared the last words I will give to humankind. These have been prepared based on my triumphs over 6 or 7 life or death situations. So, normally saying 6 deaths and resurrections, I think. But Father leaves open the possibility that there were more. And I remember in another speech, he said at least 6. So he didn't really tell us exactly how many. And, Father would sometimes say that, if I told you everything that I've been through in my life, first of all, you wouldn't believe it. And second of all, it would just be a huge burden on you. So that's why I don't tell you a lot of the things that I've experienced. including 6 periods of unjust imprisonment. So father was imprisoned 6 times. First time was well, the first time I guess was during the Japanese occupation, towards the end of the Japanese occupation, when he after he was in um, Japan studying. He studied at what is today Waseda University, and he is officially today recognized by Waseda as a graduate of the university. After he returned to Korea, he was taken into custody by the Japanese police in Gyeonggi province. Gyeonggi province is the province that surrounds the city of Seoul. And the Japanese police in Korea wanted him to give up the names of the communists that he had been working with in Japan when he was in the underground independence movement. So when he father was in Japan, he was part of the Korean independence movement, the underground Korean independence movement. And when he came back, the police wanted to know the names of the communists that he had been working with, and he refused to give those names, which is an interesting thing because you might think that father would say, well, okay, well, they're communists, and if the Japanese police arrest them and kill them or do whatever, then that's actually better. But no, father was loyal to those people, and even though he was tortured quite severely by the Japanese police, he finally refused to give up those names. Um, that was the first time, and then the second time was when he went to North Korea. He was briefly arrested and charged with carrying counterfeit currency. And the reason was that he had South Korean currency in his pocket when he went to North Korea. This would have been in 19, what, 46, 47, something like that. And at that time, of course, already the North Korean government was forming. They had their own currency. And I guess it'd be in 48, then had their own currency. And so anything from South Korea was not allowed. It was prohibited and was considered to be counterfeit currency. Then he was arrested, of course, when he was preaching in Pyongyang. He had quite a congregation in Pyongyang, and people were joining his church and leaving the existing congregations in Pyongyang. Pyongyang, during the uh, first half of the 20th century, was sometimes referred to as the Jerusalem of the East because it had so many churches. It was religiously quite an active community. But father was the rival, I guess you could say, or the other ministers were jealous of his success, and so had him arrested once or twice, I think. And then finally, he wound up in the forced labor camp in Hungnam. And of course, he was there for a year and 8 months until October 14th of a 2000, of a 1950. And on that day, then the Allied forces bombed the camp and destroyed the walls so that he and others were able to walk out. The guards had run away by that time, and so then he came south, and then he came south, and then in the South Korea he was arrested in 1955 for well for on the I read the court documents on this, and the charge that he was arrested for was avoiding the draft. Um, and the court found him innocent, but during the process, he was actually imprisoned for 3 months, from July 4th to October 4th of 1955. The media at that time sort of played it up as an arrest for sexual impropriety, that he was having sex with members. But if you read the court documents from the time, as I did, copies of the court documents that when I read them were still stored in the archives of the Korean government. He was arrested for dodging the draft. He was found innocent because he was actually in the forced labor camp in Hungnam when he was supposed to be responding to the draft, and so the court acknowledged that fact and found him innocent. but he was in jail for 3 months while they were investigating and also during the trial. And then, of course, he was imprisoned in the United States uh, for 13 months, including the halfway house time for what the IRS said was tax evasion, a very small amount of tax evasion, which the IRS's own internal policies would not have allowed them to prosecute for, but they did anyway because they were hoping that if they were to indict him, that he would simply remain in Korea and not return to the United States. So Father went through the 6 periods of unjust imprisonment. And he says, I'm leaving behind 8 textbooks and teaching materials for humankind to use for all eternity. For humankind to use for all eternity. How long is eternity? Is it 1 year? Okay, because apparently that's the definition of eternity that they have over at the Family Federation, because, of course, they no longer accept these as Father's teachings or as their teachings. Altogether, these are published in almost 1,000 volumes. And these are the sermons of the Reverend Sung Myung Moon. And today we have 615 volumes of this. There should be more. There should be more. And should be more than 615. Well, there should be more. Let's just leave it at that for now. And in the exposition of the divine principle, the Chun Sun Gyung, which we're very familiar with, the family pledge, which we're also very familiar with, Pyoa Shin Gyung, or messages of peace, the true family's gateway to heaven, and owner of peace and owner of lineage, and also world scripture. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And some people mistakenly include Father's autobiography in this list. But as you can see, his autobiography is not in the list that Father gave us. These are the textbooks you will have to read and study even after you go to the spirit world. They are not just teachings that came from the mind of one person. They are textbooks and teaching materials that teach the heavenly way that God has granted to his suffering children for their salvation. God's truth is absolute, unique, eternal, and unchanging because God himself is absolute, unique, eternal, and unchanging. So once these 8 textbooks and teaching materials are set, if someone comes along and says, you know what, we're going to ignore this, we're going to have something different, right? We're going to add to this. Yeah, we have we have something better. It doesn't matter because these 8 textbooks and teaching materials still stand alone as absolute, unique, eternal, and unchanging. And I hope that the people in the Family Federation will figure that out at some point. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. Although, as I said, you may have to extend the timeline quite a bit. Okay. You should now set up the Hundoke study tradition in your families using the books I have mentioned. So using these, so the Chensong Gyong is one that we often do, and then of course the Divine Principle, we often do that as well. Okay. The sermons of Reverend Swami, well, these are 615 volumes, and some people have read the entire content of them. I'm told. I have not done that myself. God has granted his suffering children for their salvation. You should now, okay, then mention that is the tradition where 3 generations of a family start each day by reading heaven's word and lead a life of practicing what they read with a new heart. Let's create a world where people in the spirit world and the earthly world can both attend the true path at the same time and read the word on the heavenly path together. When we do Hundoke, we are not alone. The spirit world is with us because they no longer have a physical body. They need to use our physical body in order to practice God's word, practice God's commandment, to have a Hundoke and to read Hundoke. And so this is one good way of mobilizing spirit world to work with us because they are able to take advantage of the fact that we ourselves are doing hundoke every morning. Once this happens, no matter how hard Satan may try to worm his way in to infest your lineage, once he has encountered the hundoke tradition, he will find no room to move. So it's a way of giving spiritual protection to your family. And there are no guarantees, all right, because always, people, I'm referring to, teenagers have a have the ability to choose, and they may not necessarily choose the right way. But it is a pretty good way of bringing God's protection on your family. Nothing is absolute. Okay? If a family is aligned with God as at high noon, where no shadow is cast and still does not receive God's blessings, who then could ever be deserving of them? When such heavenly families fill the earth, the world will automatically become the heavenly kingdom on earth and in the spirit world, fulfilling the vision of one family under God. So when such heavenly families fill the earth, that's God's vision. That's Father's vision to have families filling the earth. Families are the basic building block of the kingdom of heaven, not individuals. He does not say when such heavenly individuals fill the earth. No, he says when such heavenly families fill the earth. We exist as families. Everyone is someone's child. Everyone is someone's father or mother, eventually, hopefully, or brother or sister. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago, my memoirs as a peace loving global citizen and honest and candid account of my life was published. Through this book, I share how I discovered God's will for humankind and the path that we as God's children should follow. My life has been a typical model of the saying, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. I have as much faith in this book as in the Hundok textbooks and teaching materials. I have mentioned for this reason, I have mentioned for this reason, I recommend it to you. So he lists the 8. These are the actual Hundok materials, but then he's also recommending to us the autobiography, believing that it will show you how to lead your lives according to true principles. It does not subtract or add anything to the 90 years of my life, which I have led under heaven's decree. I pray you will carefully read this articulation of true love and find great inspiration. Okay. I've already mentioned that a life of vertical noontime alignment. So he mentions noontime alignment up here as well, right? If a family is aligned with God as at a high noon. So Father's imagery is that at noon, if you're on the equator, the sun is directly above you, and there's no shadow. There's no shadow. And so he uses that imagery to explain the transparency that we will have in the kingdom of heaven. No shadow means that there's no secrets, nothing can hide. And also here, he's mentioning that a second time. That a life of vertical noontime alignment casts no shadow. If we can all shine as we live such glowing lives, there will be no chance for the shadow of sin to be cast. Those who receive the light will be indebted to the light. Check that. Hmm. Okay. All right. Those who receive the light will be indebted to the light. I pray that we can now wipe away the tears of people in misery and poverty and lead an illuminated life of eternal true love that dissipates all darkness. I think here. The reason I'm looking at this sentence here, it's not what my copy says. And as I mentioned, this speech changed over time. But this English sentence seems a little bit out of character to me. What the Korean says is that those who receive are people who those who receive will be indebted. Those who receive will be indebted. It does not say the light, and maybe the translator thought that that would be a good addition. I don't know. The Father says, in order to repay the debt, we should wipe away the tears of people in misery and poverty and lead an illuminated life, eternal true love that dissipates all darkness. So there is the concept here of being indebted. Father often spoke about how we should try not to be, and so in fact we should not be indebted to others. We should always repay our debts, and we can do that by living for the sake of others. Um, and I think here, receive the light seems to me awfully Gnostic, quite frankly, and that's why I say it seems to me to be out of character from from what I know of Father's the entire body of Father's speeches, or at least the body that I'm aware of. I don't pretend to have read all of Father's speeches. Um, yeah, I think those who receive will be indebted. We can we can repay the debt by wiping away the tears of people in misery and poverty and lead an illuminated life of eternal true love and dissipate all darkness. That's how I would like to edit this sentence here. Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, last year in Las Vegas, there was a special proclamation centered on God that was given by the true parent of heaven, earth, and humankind on two separate days. One part at 2:20 a.m. on the eighth day of the fifth month of the heavenly calendar, and the other at 3:25 a.m. on the 15th day of the fifth day of the heavenly calendar. And we talk about this in the OSDP, right? And the significance of it. And Revenue Revenue Jongo sort of authored the OSDP after having spent many hours with Father and receiving many teachings from him. And Revenue's explanation of these events in 2010 was that Father was trying to get his wife at the time, Hak Jahan, to commit absolutely to being totally faithful to him, because she was not doing that up until that time. And so, and the reason that he did it twice was because it didn't stick the first time. In other words, she at the first one on June 19th of the solar calendar, uh, he had this. Then it didn't work, and so then he did it again on June 26th, a week later. And uh, uh, Father received a blessing with Hak Jahan in 1960, and then in 2003 he went through the holy blessing with Hak Jahan again, and this was a growth level blessing. The one in 1960 was the formation stage blessing, 2003. And Father's plan, according to what Reverend Yu heard from Father, was taught from Father, was to have the perfection blessing in 2010. So 1960, and then 43 years later in 2003, and then 7 years later in 2010. But Hakchahan was not being faithful. And so he tried on these two occasions, in the fifth month of the heavenly calendar, 1 week apart, to get her to commit absolutely to following him totally. But she would not do that, or she gave verbal consent and then sort of broke the promise. And interestingly, Father, in the next sentence says the number three from 325 represents the three eras from this saying success comes at the third attempt. So the third blessing that Father received actually took place not in 2010, but another 7 years later in 2017. But by 2017, Father was no longer in his physical body. He left his physical body in 2012. And Hak Jahan had completely separated herself from Father. Of course, using and exploiting his name and image, but putting forth her own theology and completely separating herself from Father. And so Father, in 2017, uh, replaced her with another woman who is today our eternal true mother, Hyunshia Kang. Some people will say that, oh, she's just a placeholder until Hak Jahan repents. No, she is our eternal true mother. Jesus was not a placeholder until Adam repents, right? So there is no placeholder idea. There's no theology of the placeholder in God's providence. When someone does not fulfill the responsibility, they are replaced. They are replaced for eternity. Adam is replaced for eternity. Eve is replaced for eternity. If if Hak Jahan can come back to the position of the true mother, then why not Eve? Right? She's the original. No, she was replaced. Hak Jahan was replaced. As, by the way, was Mrs. Che, who was the father's first wife, and also Mrs. Lee, father's second wife. So father finally was able to have a wife at the cosmic perfection level in 2017, and that was as far as God and Father could wait. Father waited for as long as he could, but in the end, the needs of the providence had to be fulfilled. The providence needed to move forward, and God, the true Father, could not actually act as the Messiah, the true parent, on the cosmic perfection level unless he had a woman with him. And so, and that woman had to be someone who would unite with him completely, unreservedly. And when Hak Jahan refused to do that, when actually walked away from that idea, then Father, reluctantly, I'm sure, chose a different woman, our eternal true mother, Hyun Shil Kang. So praise God that she was able to, that our true mother, Hyun Shil Kang, was able to respond to God's call and come to Pennsylvania from Korea, escaping the clutches of the Family Federation. And they tried to keep her in Korea. They tried to track her cell phone so as to block her from leaving Korea. But she sort of pulled a fast one. And they actually, the Family Federation actually mobilized the Korean police to track her phone. Today there are apps that do that, but back then I think it was a little more difficult to do it by apps. So yeah, they had the police track her phone for them, but then she realized that that's what was happening, and so she left her phone in a place and moved without her phone Her phone was later restored to her after she arrived in America. And actually, flying to America against the advice of her doctor because she had high blood pressure, and the doctor advised against making such a long trip across the Pacific and across the North American continent. But she said she was willing to risk death in order to respond to Father's call to come to Pennsylvania and be with the king and to support the king and do what Hak Jahan should have been doing all along. And so True Mother came to Pennsylvania, testified to Father, and also she appeared in many, I would say, yeah, well, many King's Report sessions, and she spoke, gave her testimony at church, and lived in the same house as the second king, and supported him in many ways until she finally departed in 2019, I believe. 2019, I believe. Quite an inspiring story. So that was what was happening in 2010. That Father, he's mentioning it here, and he does not say that. Okay, this is when I was really trying to get Hak Chan to follow me, because he was, you know, keeping all that difficulty sort of behind the curtain, shall we say, and not, not putting his dirty laundry, as it were, out in public. This was something that he needed to resolve, and so he kept it private. And I was not aware of what was going on behind the scenes until actually the king spoke about it. Um, well, not just in the breaking the silence, but actually I was aware of it before then, because I heard him speaking about it after I got here, after I got to Pennsylvania in 2014, and started working with him directly. But the general congregation was not aware about it until the king spoke out in January of 2015. So it also symbolized the Old, New, and Complete Testament. 25 minutes, or the number 25, is a quarter of 100. The true parents have achieved ultimate unity. So Father says true parents have achieved ultimate unity. And so the Family Federation says, look, Father says he achieved ultimate unity. Well, he achieved, so Hak Jahan promised ultimate unity. She promised ultimate unity verbally, but she did not execute it. And so in July of 2012, when Father was speaking to the uh, Women's Federation event in Chongpyeong, Korea, he interjected a comment in his speech saying, I have no wife. I have no wife. A shocking thing to say. So if he has achieved ultimate unity, then what's this about having no wife? But that was when Father, probably for the first time, really let us know that things were not as they appeared to be behind the scenes. It was about 6 weeks after that he departed his physical body. Here he was giving the sort of the public stance that he has achieved ultimate unity and offered and proclaimed the era of God's full transcendence, full eminence, full authority, and omnipotence upon the standard of perfection, completion, and conclusion. And he could say this because Hak Jahan had made that promise. Right? And it's interesting that he carried this speech around with him. And every day at Hundoke, the speech was on the table beside him, where Hak Jahan could see it. And of course, it was read many, many times. And Hak Jahan heard him read this paragraph or heard this paragraph being read, that she had promised ultimate unity. But was she living that promise? Was she? Clearly not. Clearly not. Clearly not. And those who say that Hak Jahan today is one with Father and that she speaks for Father are deluded. It was interesting during the deposition of Hak Jahan in 2019. uh, we presented to her the declaration Father had made in June 2010 about Young Janim being the heir and successor, and all others are the heretics and destroyers. And her lawyer actually tried to object, tried to say, "Oh, there's no foundation for that. You can't introduce that." But she went ahead and spoke anyway. She went ahead and answered the question anyway. And she said, "That document is not valid because I did not sign it." The transcript. That's what she said. Well, obviously, if there was ultimate unity, then he could speak for her, but she denied that ultimate unity right there in the deposition. All right, we will continue next week, and uh, this is a very important speech, and so I want to make sure that we do it in as much detail as possible. All right, I'll see you next week. God bless, Godspeed. I'll see you actually tomorrow with the regular King's Report. God bless, Godspeed. May His kingdom come quickly.